In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Red Lightning build, which is a New Game Plus build that focuses on the use of Dragon Cult Incantations and their lightning aspect. Know that you can also play this build in your first playthrough, but it'll take you a while to gather all the needed things for this, so you won't be able to play the majority of the game with this, which is why it's a New Game Plus build. So first, let's dive into our seal setup. In the right hand, we have the Erdtree seal, and in the left hand, we have the Gravelstone seal. The Gravelstone seal buffs your Dragon Cult Incantations as long as you're holding it, but its scaling is not as good as the Erdtree seal. So by holding it in the left hand, casting spells in our right hand, we're going to get far better incantation scaling with the Erdtree seal, but still get the extra damage from the Gravelstone seal. Now, if you make it a New Game Plus and you make it far enough that you can get a second Gravelstone seal, I would recommend swapping the Erdtree seal out for that, upgrading that one, and casting with that one in your right hand, and then holding the other Gravelstone seal in your other hand. This will actually provide you more damage than if you're using the Erdtree seal, so this is not a bad way to go. I do want to note here that if you are playing on your first playthrough and you're putting this build together as you go, that you don't want to use the Erdtree seal until you have over about 60 faith or so. So if you pick up the Erdtree seal and you also have the Gravelstone seal and you're not sure which to use, if you don't have at least 60 faith or so, you're going to be using the Gravelstone seal. So next, let's take a look at the spells that we're using for this build. The first one is obviously Golden Vow. This is a spell that increases your damage and reduces the damage you take. I use this situationally, mostly for boss fights. I don't use this really while I'm out on the landscape because my damage is good enough the way it is. But if you need a little extra damage, you can use this and buff yourself. I know people have criticized some of my builds for buffs and things like that, but it just doesn't make sense to not incorporate that into this build for when you need it, when you already have, stacking faith to the moon. So it's there if you need it, you might as well slot it. That being said, the next spell we're going to take a look at is Lightning Strike. I'm going to kind of do these in the order that you get these as you play through naturally. Lightning Strike is found in the Weeping Peninsula, so it's very, very early in the game. And this is your bread and butter spell with this build. This is going to be the spell that you kill a lot of the vast majority of the enemies with. And why it's so deadly is that it has very good damage, and it hits in a line, sort of a zigzag line in front of you in a modest line, so it can hit multiple enemies at the same time. But what's really, really good about it is that once you get that first cast off, if you hit R1 again, you can cast it again rapidly, and then you can cast it again rapidly, and then you can cast it again rapidly. If you keep pressing R1, this allows you to just shell out a lot of damage really, really quickly, and allows you to burst down a very difficult enemy or boss fast. Another thing I really like about this spell is that you can use it on horseback, and not only that, but it will go to the direction of the locked on target no matter which direction you're facing, which is extremely useful if you have an aggressive enemy coming at you. The next spell we're going to take a look at is Lightning Spear. This is the next spell that you will probably find in this build, and it's a staple of any lightning build and a lot of incantation builds in general just because it's very effective. You can charge it for extra damage, and this is really good for just picking off single targets or finishing off a target that needs to be hit quickly. This is your fast casting spell. Lightning Strike takes a second for that first cast, and then you can chain it quickly, but that first cast is very slow. So Lightning Spear is your alternative when you need to get a fast cast off to finish something off that's about to die, or you just don't have the spacing or time to use Lightning Strike. And something that's really interesting about this spell as well is that it's actually only 1 FP less than Lightning Strike. So it's not going to save you that much more FP to use this spell, so really you want to use this spell when you just can't use Lightning Strike. The next spell that we use is Lanciax's Glaive. This is a spell that's a red lightning spell that sort of makes you rise up into a slash animation, hitting for decent damage if you hit with a slash, but then it sort of fans out in an AoE behind it, hitting enemies for less damage. So I really use this spell in two situations. First is when there's a large number of enemies in front of me, just in front of me. This is a good way to AoE them all down. Or if you have a fast moving target that you just can't seem to hit with Lightning Strike or with Lightning Spear, this is a good way to just hit them because it's just not going to miss very easily, and it deals decent damage. Next we have Frozen Lightning Spear. This sort of slams a blue lightning down in front of you that does kind of like a lightning in a kind of small cone in front of you that also does Frostbite buildup. And frankly, I find this spell good to apply the Frostbite status effect. It's a good way to do that with this build. There are some enemies that are just going to be resistant to lightning, and this is a good way to help debuff them so that your lightning spells actually do more damage. So if you're starting a fight and your enemy, your enemy is resistant to lightning damage, this is not a bad way to debuff them so that you can deal more lightning damage. It's also not a bad one-off spell. You can absolutely kill enemies and bosses with it if it's set up correctly, but you have a lot of other options as well. But if you're playing in new game and you're building this as you go, this is going to be used a lot more in this build in your first playthrough than probably will be in New Game Plus when you have stronger spells. And the last spell we're going to take a look at is Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike. This is another red lightning spell that summons lightning where you're standing, that then sort of goes outward from you in like directional patterns that then strike repeatedly as they move outward. And if you charge it up, then it'll go even further than it would originally. But this spell is useful in 2 situations where you're surrounded by enemies, and it really, really works well against big enemies. Like if you can get under a dragon with it, for instance, or you can get up next to a big enemy and cast this, you usually hit with multiple columns of lightning, which deals incredible damage. And another thing I really like about the spell too is it can be cast from horseback, so you can like round up a bunch of enemies on the landscape, cast it, and just wipe a bunch of them out. So when it comes for armor for this build, it's not super important what you wear. There are helmets that will give you faith, but not a huge amount of it. You can wear that if you want to min-max. That's probably not a bad idea. But you want to minimally wear an armor set that gives you 51 poise. This will make it so that if you get hit by a regular attack while you're casting a spell, it doesn't interrupt your cast animation, which makes it easier to play this build. And when it comes to talismans we have for this build, I have Flock's Canvas Talisman, which just increases the damage of incantations in general, which is nice. We have the Lightning Scorpion Charm, which increases all of your lightning damage, but makes you take more damage. All of our spells are lightning, so it benefits all of them, but you will take some increased damage from that. We have Ritual Sword Talisman, which increases our damage by 10%. This includes any damage we do while we're at full HP, so you're going to try and stay at full HP as often as possible. And then the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman to further boost our defenses, particularly because we're weakened a little bit from that Lightning Scorpion Charm. A couple things I want to note here, though, that you can do to help this build or to change this build up a little bit if you want to make some tweaks is, for instance, if you want a melee weapon to use with this build, Coated Sword is not a bad choice because it scales only with Faith. You'll have very high Faith with this build. It's also a different damage type than Holy Damage. Even though Holy Damage isn't the greatest damage in the game, it can still be good against a boss that might be resistant against lightning in some cases, and it gives you a decent melee option if you don't want to range attack everything. This is particularly good probably in your first playthrough when you don't have as much attribute points. And the next thing I want to mention is that slotting a spell like Heal or Great Heal, for instance, is not bad. This will give you a way to spend FP to top yourself up so that you get the bonus from Ritual Sword Talisman. Otherwise, if you have to chug a pot like every time, you take one little hit, you're going to go through your HP pots really, really fast. And also, if you're using a heal over time, you have to wait for that heal over time to get you back up to full health in order for you to get that extra damage. You don't want to stand there and wait around before you go attack enemies. So having a direct heal from like an incantation would be a better choice because it'll get you back up to full health instantly. So moving on to the attribute points, we have 55 Vigor, 44 Mind, 20 Endurance, 8 Strength, 12 Dexterity, 16 Intelligence, and 9 Arcane. You absolutely don't need any Strength, Dexterity, or Intelligence for this build. Whatever your starting class is going to kind of dictate what the stat spread is for these, but you really only need Faith, so don't pay any attention to those. You also don't need Arcane for this build, but you can add Arcane if you want to add in more incantations that have Arcane requirements, like Blood spells or Dragon spells if you want. I did not obviously include them here because it's a lightning-themed build, but if you want to, you could increase Arcane a little bit in order to get that in and wouldn't change this build too much. We do have 55 Vigor here, which is a good amount for New Game Plus. It's probably more than I normally have. You could actually take a couple points out here and put them into Mind if you want to get more FP, but you will want to take this up to 60 eventually. You do take increased damage because of the Lightning Scorpion Charm, even though we do gain some from the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. You still want to make sure you have enough health to survive a hit, which is why we have high Vigor. 44 Mind is there because you literally don't have a melee attack with this build unless you slot something like the Coated Sword to save yourself from FP, which I strongly recommend. If it's your first playthrough, you're just going to be casting spells. That's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be going through FP like crazy, so having a larger FP pool will prevent you from having to pot all the time, and some of these spells are quite expensive, so having that FP pool will allow you to cast a lot of spells before having to use a pot, and also save on the amount of pots you need to use. 20 Endurance is simply here in order to be able to medium roll and give you some stamina. A lot of times when you're chaining Lightning Strike, you're going to run out of stamina before you run out of FP. That'll be the determining factor. So even getting Endurance up to like 25, 30 wouldn't be bad for this build because it'll allow you to use Lightning Strike more easily. And as I said earlier, that's really your bread and butter with this build. And lastly, we come to Faith. Obviously, we have 80 here in order to take max advantage of the Erd Tree Seal. You'll eventually take this up to 99. The scaling from this point drops off considerably. I think you only get 1 point of incantation scaling per point of Faith from this point forward. So you're only looking at maybe about 19 more incantation scaling. However, that's really the only way forward to increase your damage at this point. So eventually you're going to need to do that. Some final tips for this build before I wrap up this video. If you're using the Flask of Wonders Physique, you obviously want the crack tier that increases lightning damage. All your spells are lightning, so that's really nice. It'll help you in any boss fight or any stretch where you need extra damage. And the one that increases your stamina regeneration will help. That way, if you fling a lot of spells, your stamina will replenish quickly. Or if you need to fling some spells and dodge roll and fling some spells, your stamina will come back quickly and you're not sort of handicapped by the amount of stamina that you have. And when it comes to the Great Rune for this build, there's really two that I would recommend. You could either use Godric's Great Rune early on until you have Radahn's. This will give you, more vigor, more mind, more endurance, more faith, and that's all you really need from it, which isn't bad. I usually don't recommend that Great Rune unless you need like 5 or 6 stats, but it's not a bad one to use early on. And then when you get Radahn's, you're going to gain FP, you're going to gain stamina, you're going to gain HP. All those are really important for this build, particularly since like once you have 60 vigor, once you have about 50 mind, once you have about 30 endurance, once you have 99 faith, which is about another 50 levels, you really don't need to do anything else with this build stat-wise. So getting those extra FP, stamina, and HP from somewhere else is a good benefit to this build. So that wraps up the Red Lightning build. I know people have been looking forward to this build for a long time now, and it does help that some of these spells were buffed in patch 1.07, making this build more effective. It was more fun to do because of that as well, so that's really nice. We do have more Elden Ring builds coming. We have more Hogwarts Legacy coming. Make sure you sign up for the giveaway for Hogwarts Legacy if you haven't already. We are giving away a collector's edition for that game. And again, make sure you let me know like what builds you want to see next and what weapon videos. Looks like it's probably going to be curved great swords, spears, or maybe colossal swords. We'll see.